When you want to know what's going on economically, you don't listen to TikTok or you don't listen to Instagram or X. You listen to somebody who actually knows. This guy was the chief economist at the Trump White House in the first term. It's Vance Ginn, vanceginn.com. Vance, how are you? Good to see you.
Hey, I'm doing well, Joe. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you again. So there's a lot going on economically. Let me throw you a bit of a curveball. I'm at the gym today, and I'm on the stair stepper, not the stair stepper, the treadmill. And I'm looking up, and of course, there's MSNBC. Trump is bad. Trump's health is going. He was an Epstein buddy, all this stuff. Then they finally got to some news where they said, deadline looms. September 30th is the deadline. You got to get a budget done. Can he sway some Democrats? And has he used all of his political power and his sway to this and that and the other? Let's talk about the budget. It is only 28 days away, so 4 weeks from today, you've got to have an actual budget. And I don't think there's any sort of give when it comes to the 7 Democrats that you need to pass a budget. And Vance, you and I talked about this a lot. I am not a guy who wants to see more CRs. What's likely to happen, do you think?
Well, I'm with you, Joe. I don't want to see more CRs either, but unfortunately, that's likely what we're going to see. I mean, the House hasn't passed out all of the 12 appropriation bills that need to be passed, and the Senate really hasn't done much on the budget at all. So it looks to me like they're going to have to force something through quickly because the past or the latest CR they passed went through the end of the fiscal year, which is at the end of this month. And so they've got to come up to something by the 1st of October, or we're going to have a shutdown or something like that. And I think, you know, the Trump administration kind of learned, I guess, from 2019 what effect that could have in the polls and everything else. And so I don't think that they want to get to that point. So hopefully we'll see something soon before the end of this month. But look, Joe, at the same time, you know, we've got the one big beautiful bill passed. I think there was a lot of good stuff in there overall. We could argue back and forth a couple of things, but for the most part, it was pro-growth, and I think it was heading us in the right direction. Now what we need to see is more spending restraint. That had a lot of good tax cuts, it had a little bit of spending restraint, but I'm hopeful that we can get more spending restraint here in the next CR.
It's Vance Ginn. Go to @Vance Ginn right now. @Vance Ginn over on the internet. You can go to @Vance Ginn is actually on X. Your actual website is vanceginn.com, and it's Vance Ginn. Let's talk about the continuing resolution, or let's talk about reconciliation heading into this bill. The reconciliation was just to carry us until September 30th. September 30th is the big deal, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So reconciliation doesn't go beyond September 30th. That big argument, Vance, was for like 2 or 3 months' work. That's it. And then you've got to have a brand new deal or a continuing resolution. You and I talked about this before, and many people in my audience didn't realize this, that you can do another reconciliation in November. So what do? You do a CR. If you can't get 7, and I want 7 to happen, and I want there to be an actual budget, let's say you can't, you do a CR, then you can do reconciliation again in November?
That's right. Yep. And it will be up on
So what does that look like?
Well, I mean, you could come in, pass the budget for the next fiscal year, which is likely what they'll do, or at least for a few months. They'll kick the can down the road in the CR, and then hopefully maybe in November, whenever you can go through another reconciliation like they did the one big beautiful bill earlier this year, then they could come out with some more. And from talks on the ground is that they're looking for more spending cuts, which I'm hopeful that they will. I'm not sure what else will be in there just yet, but it will give them another bite at the apple this year to make some good pro-growth policy reforms.
So what is it, mechanically speaking, let's say you're in the White House now, you're the chief economist, you're going into September 30th, you want a deal. Trump wants a deal. He wants an actual budget, maybe even 12 separate items to make sure that we do it constitutionally, but we're likely to get a continuing resolution. Is there leverage or some way, some sway that the president has that you would help him with that can convince 7 Democrats to agree?
Well, it's going to be an uphill battle for sure.
Yeah.
But I mean, he was able to do it in the first administration. So I think he has some opportunities to do it this time around as well. You know, look, I think we're in a fiscal crisis. We're in a spending crisis. We're spending too much. And hopefully what the president can do is convince some of those more moderate Democrats, I think there may be a few of them still around and not too many, to say, look, this is about the future of our country. We're able to keep more money in their pockets through the one big beautiful bill. Now it's time to really set the course for spending restraint over time. Not even necessarily cutting the budget, which I would prefer them to do, but even if they just slow the growth rate over time compared to what the trajectory you're on now, we could definitely see a better fiscal direction for the future. And so I hope that's what the president can do and can talk to them to it. And you know, in the first administration, it was usually either Russ Vought, who is my boss at OMB, or or Mnuchin Steve Mnuchin over in the Treasury Department. They were the ones that were making a lot of those decisions, and Mnuchin usually would be the main one to go over there. Now it might be Scott Bessent, our Treasury Secretary now, along with Russ Vought. And I'm hopeful that they can have some good leverage and also good reasoning for why we need less spending. Less spending is also pro-growth, because that means less money coming out of the productive private sector. I know a lot of Democrats won't like that, and maybe even some Republicans, but at the end of the day, that's what this has to be about, because we've got to get our spending house in order.
Yeah, but Vance, the argument they've been you're right. Of course, you're right about all that. But the argument they've been making is, well, it's not really that we have to cut spending so much because the CBO is only saying 1 point something percent GDP. We already had 3% in 1 month. We had 3.2 or 3.3 in the next quarter or the next month, whatever the hell it was. So we're already growing at almost double what the CBO thought was going to happen. So that clearly is going to start cutting down the debt. You're saying we would like to cut spending, but what about that component where they were being very conservative in a very liberal CBO, being very conservative about their numbers about growth? Can this growth continue, and can that in fact start biting into the debt?
Well, the growth can certainly continue if there aren't other impediments to growth, and they continue to have more deregulation, have the tax cuts go through, and the one big beautiful bill. I mean, those things could definitely support more economic growth. The problem that I'm seeing is that we also have some distortion, some economic slowdown in some capacities when you look across the economy as well, whether it be the labor market or in some other factors. And if that revenue continues to slow, then you're going to have to be focused more on the spending side. So I think you're exactly right, though, Joe. We need a 2-4 situation. We need less spending and more economic growth. You put those two together, and that's an awesome combination of pro-growth policy for the future. And by the way, the CBO, they had less economic growth that they are projecting, but they also were projecting lower interest rates. So if interest rates stay higher because there's more economic growth, then that would mean that we'd have even a bigger bill to pay later for spending because of net interest on the debt.
Vance, the whole interest rate thing is confusing to me. You and I talked about this at length last time. I'm going to bring it up again in a second. At Vance Ginn, VanceGinn, or just go to VanceGinn.com, former chief economist over at the Trump White House in the first term. Last time we spoke, you seemed to be making the argument that you don't really need interest rates to be lowered because that would be bad somehow. But we do want them lowered. If I want to go and borrow money, it costs me less to borrow the money. So is there an argument to be made that interest rates are okay where they are, or should they be brought down?
Well, I think interest rates are okay where they're at right now, which is in a range that the Fed targets between 4.25 and 4.5%. Interest rates on mortgages are also connected to the 10-year Treasury note rate. That's around 4.25%, 4.5%, somewhere in that range is where it's been here lately. And so that's kept mortgage rates up higher than what they have been in 20 years. But it's still not excessively high. And at the same time, what I really was focused on, and still am, Joe, is that we've got to cut the Fed's balance sheet. The balance sheet is where they hold their assets, mortgage-backed securities, treasury debt, and all these things that they put more money into the economy by buying those assets, that debt. And their balance sheet is $6.6 trillion with a T. That's nearly 25% of the entire economy is in that money stock held by the Federal Reserve. And so what I would rather see them do, instead of cutting interest rates that the president has talked about, which could have other sort of inflationary components to it, is to cut the Fed's balance sheet. And if they did that, they would reduce the inflationary pressures. They would allow for markets to really work, and it would allow for these pro-growth policies by the Trump administration to really take effect, to where you could separate those two. Look, at the end of the day, I want to get rid of the Fed, Joe. As you know, I don't like the Fed or anything else.
Should not be a Fed.
Right, because the markets should set interest rates, not the Federal Reserve.
Right. It is Vance Ginn. Go to Vance Ginn. It's VanceGinn.com. Yeah, it's all very confusing to me because as I look into it more, and you made me do this, Vance, but as I look into it more, the Federal Reserve appears to be a centralized group of banking bigwigs that are lending us the actual notes, and then we have to pay them back the notes at a percentage instead of us actually having gold back. There's no the whole gold basic, that's gone. We don't base anything. The gold standard is done. I think Nixon did that in earnest. I don't even know if there's anything at Fort Knox. But we're not borrowing. We're not taking the dollars I have in my pocket are like lent to me by the Federal Reserve, and we somehow have an inflationary interest rate that they get paid back. It's like we're taking care of a small group of people that control the money instead of the money actually being worth something. Man, that was a long way to get to my question, which is very simply, do we have a real necessity to have a Federal Reserve, and is it really this bait and switch that I just explained to you? They're giving us the notes that they say they'll back, and then we somehow either gain value in the notes or reduce value in the notes, depending on what they do.
Yeah, no, you're right, Joe. I mean, that's what they're doing. They put those Federal Reserve notes. They buy the
Are they
Treasury
confusing
debt.
me on purpose, Vance?
Yes, they are. They are. That's what most government does, is they try to
Yeah.
confuse you so they can hide what they're actually doing. But you're right. I mean, what they do is they print off those Federal Reserve notes, those dollars that you have in your pocket, and they buy the Treasury securities that us in the private sector have. They hold that on their balance sheet. They give us the Federal Reserve note. We deposit it into our bank. And then now we've got the money supply creation going across the economy. But of course, that then influences inflation. And when inflation goes up, we reduce our purchasing power, meaning we don't have as much money because they just printed. They diluted the dollar. Think about this. When you increase the supply, what happens? Prices go down, or the price of that item goes down. And that's exactly what happens to the value of our dollar. When you print too much money compared to the demand, you're going to see value of the dollar go down. And so therefore our purchasing power decreases in the process as well. So there's really not a reason for the Federal Reserve to do that sort of action, which is called monetary policy or monetary actions. If anything, they were created in 1913, the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, after the Aldrich Commission in 1907. And their main purpose was to be a lender of last resort. A lender of last resort. If that was all they were doing, then maybe there would be a reason for them to exist. The problem is that they're getting their hands wet in everything else throughout our economy and creating more distortions and boom and bust cycles in the process.
Well, it's so very well explained. And I think the biggest thing that most Americans don't realize is that when we used to go to war, we would have to sell bonds to the American people, basically giving them a vote if they wanted to go to war. In fact, the Louisiana Purchase was Napoleon having to pay off his war debt, so we got much of the country because of it. We got Alaska from Russia because they had to pay off their war debt. Now we've got a Federal Reserve that literally can print all the money we need. We can do all the wars we want to do and just cause mayhem as far as debt goes. So, I mean, that's really what happened, right? I mean, after the Federal Reserve wasn't just a reserve place to go and get money, they became, let's do QE2 and QE3, and let's quantitative ease everything. After they started printing money like crazy, there was endless wars that will be financed by some body of people that have to be paid back with interest. It is, to me, it's a scam. So let me ask you what I asked you earlier, because I think the answer is yes. Could we tomorrow say no more Federal Reserve? Because Congress made them, Congress can delete them.
Yes. Yes, they can.
What would happen immediately if we did that?
Well, you repeal the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. It gets rid of the Federal Reserve, and then we could have a banking system. I mean, you could still have the system in place if you wanted to get rid of it entirely. Allow for private banks to issue their own currency. That's what we did before the Federal Reserve was put in place. It's also what happened whenever gold backed our dollar, when you had an asset that backed it. Even we talked about this before too, Joe, about Bitcoin or the blockchain. They should have competitive currencies that are out there, and what that would do is allow for competition instead of the government, the Federal Reserve being the monopoly that it is on our dollars. We could actually have a competitive currency system. And I think that's exactly what we need to get to. And that's why we should end the Fed. I think that there would likely be a wind down of the Fed, right? Instead of just one night it's gone, because that could create a lot of uncertainty and distortions, although it might be the best thing to do. It'd probably be a wind down. And I think during that wind down, let's say it's 6 months or 4 months, how many ever months that it is, you would start to see other competition enter the marketplace and fill that void that we have today, which is the Federal Reserve creating so many problems throughout the economy.
It is Vance Ginn. Go to @VanceGinn over on X. You can go to VanceGinn.com, former chief economist at the Trump White House in the first time around. Let me ask you about housing. Housing, generally speaking, seems to be an immigration issue, according to J.D. Vance and the DHS. A lot of people, millions and millions of people are here. They've got to be housed somewhere. That's why there's a housing crunch, and people are having a hard time finding houses. There aren't enough houses being built. But now, Scott Bessent, as you mentioned earlier, he's now saying this could be a Treasury issue as well. This can be an inflationary issue. This can be an interest rates issue. Is there a Treasury component to why there's a housing crunch right now?
Well, I think so. I mean, it definitely influences a lot of interest rates across the economy. It's also influencing the housing market, which is a large part of our economy through construction and everything else. And if you can't afford a home, you sell it off. Well, then that means more debt is going to be in the marketplace. And will the Federal Reserve and the Treasury be more involved with that? You also have another issue with Treasuries, Joe, is that we're issuing so much debt, about $2 trillion a year right now of new debt. we're also rolling over old debt. So new debt and old debt are being rolled over or being purchased on a day-to-day basis. And the more debt that you have come open in the housing market, it's going to crowd out the amount of money that you can buy in treasury debt, which could push up interest rates higher. And if interest rates go up, the Federal Reserve says, you know what, we don't want interest rates to go up. Let's print more money, put more money into the system to bring interest rates back down to where we want to target them. And then what happens? We have more inflation, which means housing prices could go up higher. So I think that could be what Bassett was really getting at, was that the Treasury is involved because it could influence interest rates and what's happening with the housing market and the amount of purchasing of debt that's going across the economy.
It's Vance Ginn. Vance, is there an easy way to explain why it is that our interest rates are higher than they are in some other parts of the world? Trump keeps talking about how we're higher by a lot than some other countries. Why would it be lower there and higher here?
Well, the big one is that our economy is growing much faster than what those economies are doing. And many of them are, even in Germany, I've heard it's in a recession right now. There are other economies that are really suffering. And even though I do think we've slowed some in our economy, we're still doing better off than what they are. And therefore, you have higher interest rates that go across the economy because their central bank, the European Central Bank, has been lowering their target overnight lending rate between banks. Right. And they put more money into the economy. They're trying to juice it up because it's so weak. But at the same time, they're going to see more inflation. And so what I don't want to see here in America is that we have a stronger economy right now than they do. Let's not resort to the 1970s policies that we should have won, because in the 1970s, the Federal Reserve printed a lot of money. There wasn't a lot of economic growth because of price and wage controls and a lot of regulations that happened during that time. And that led to a lot of inflation called the Great Inflation. Well, inflation went up, Joe, came back down, and then the Fed printed more money again because they were trying to juice the economy, and inflation went up even higher. And that's why whenever Paul Volcker came in and then Reagan came in, we ended up having a double dip recession in the early 1980s, but then we had more pro-growth policies that helped to get us out of that and had a booming economy thereafter. So the focus should be on pro-growth policies, not on manipulating more with the interest rates.
Amazing information as always. About 30 seconds left with Vance Ginn. Let's talk tariffs. Is there an end game? Do you think that he put them on to get to use the leverage to bring all the manufacturing back? Then he doesn't want tariffs. Vance, he appears to want tariffs forever.
Yeah. Well, and that's been my main concern, Joe. I mean, whether you want to get into some of the discussions about bringing other countries to the table like China or going after and saying we want more manufacturing here in the United States, but it looks like they want to make this on forever. They're considering about $2.7 trillion in new revenue being brought in over the next decade, or $270 billion a year, to help fund other things. And so that's a problem. If you want them to go away, we should say, here's the end date and have an idea of when that should be to get rid of these tariffs as quickly as possible, because at the end of the day, they're taxes on Americans. And I think they slow down economic growth. And go back to what we talked about earlier. Hopefully they're going to watch this show, Joe, as they know. I hope they do. Is to say, let's focus on pro-growth policies. That's what Trump has been able to trump so much over time. That's the path he should take.
I love it. It's Vance Ginn. Go to vanceginn.com, at Vance Ginn over on X. Always incredible information. I love the excitement, too. There's so much energy. Vance, thank you.
Hey, thanks, Joe. Have a great day.
All right, brother. Talk to you soon. We're back after this in the Joe Pag Show. Stay right here.